Participants, it's a great privilege and pleasure to welcome you all to the maiden edition of the Laciac live debates. It's a very important day for us today at Laciac because it marks the launch of what we hope will be a continuous and continual series. The debate, the Laciac live debate series debates was born out of a need to create a platform where the arbitration community can objectively consider emerging trends and controversial issues in international arbitration. Our aim at Laciac is to ensure the growth and development of sound arbitration practitioners and create the opportunity for the proper understanding of ongoing issues within our industry. What better way would there be to do it than to have renowned practitioners present opposing views on a very topical issue, thereby creating room for intellectual discussion, discourse, and enlightenment. Beyond contributing to the development of the community and those that come after us, we view this, among other things that we do, as our little way of giving back to a community that allows us to thrive. And therefore, I'd like to congratulate everyone who has chosen to be a part of today's event, especially the younger practitioners. This indicates our determination to pursue growth, development, and attain the highest standards in our profession. I'd like to also acknowledge the very hard work of the organizing committee and thank everyone who has worked on actualizing the objectives of the Laciac live debates and those who have taken steps towards ensuring the success of this launch. I'd really like to thank the debaters, Professor Grayson and Professor Jacob Grayson, I'm reading ahead of myself. Jacob Grayson, thank you very much, and Professor Mohammed Abdel Wahab for graciously agreeing to take part in our virtual stage at the very first edition. And the moderator, Ndanga Kamau, thank you very much. It's not possible to have such a momentous event without acknowledging why we're having this virtually, the COVID-19 pandemic. This pandemic has in so many ways encouraged us to embrace innovative means. It's astonishing as well as convenient. And the global reach that one can and has in fact achieved during this period where holding a physical meeting of over 200 people is, for health reasons, ill-advised. We need not restate that this has also brought to the fore the issue of virtual hearings. Although virtual hearings are not strange to international arbitration, our new normal has placed a great emphasis on virtual hearing and has raised a number of questions. I won't eat into Ndanga's work, but I'd like to say this is our belief, that the motion for this edition couldn't have come at a better time. We hope this will spur interesting conversations within the international arbitration community and provide clarity to those who need such clarity. So, Ndanga, I cannot wait to set you all. I must introduce you though. Thank you for graciously accepting to oversee today's session. Ndanga is, I'm happy to read this, is an international lawyer specializing in international dispute settlement, public international law, and private international law. She's the founder of the Ndanga Kamau Law, an international law practice based in The Hague. She sits as arbitrator in institutional and ad hoc arbitrations and represents clients in international disputes. Prior to setting up her practice, she worked in international law firms in an arbitral institution, government, and international organizations in Geneva, Houston, London, Mauritius, and Nairobi. Ndanga regularly lectures and speaks on international dispute settlements and has done so in Africa, Asia, Australia, Europe, and North America. In addition to her practice, she serves as Vice President, International Chamber of Commerce, the ICC, International Court of Arbitration, President, ICC Africa Commission, Vice Chair, International Bar Association, the IBA, Arbitration Committee, and Director of Programs, African Association of International Law, the AAIL. Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, I present to you Ndanga Kamau. Ndanga, please do your thing. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Akeredolu. That's a very generous introduction. The attention should be focused on the two debaters. Today, I'm merely playing the role of a traffic warden. But I would like to start by thanking the team at Laciac, you included, for organizing this fantastic event. I think that you're really setting the standard high, and anybody who doubts that need only look at the publicity material where Jacob, Mohammed, and I didn't recognize ourselves when we saw that fantastic photograph of us that's been sent around to the participants. So thank you very much for that. And we look forward not just to this debate, but to other future Laciac live debates. Now, I know the participants will be wanting me to get out of the way to hear from our formidable debaters. But before I do that, I have three tasks. The first is to tell you a little bit about the debate format, introduce the debate. The second is to tell you how you can participate. And the final one will be to introduce the speakers. So starting with the format of the debate, you will all have seen the motion for today's debate, which is that virtual hearings are good for international arbitration and should be mandated. Now, I can already hear the collective groans from the audience. Some of you during this time of confinement have spent every moment you had reading every guideline and note on virtual hearings. You've watched numerous webinars and you think that you're experts on virtual hearings, but you have not heard from our debaters. So I urge you to keep an open mind and to allow yourselves to be persuaded, depending on where your views lie on this particular topic, and you're in for a treat. Now, on the more practical matters on the debate, it will take about 40 to 45 minutes, depending on the discipline of the debaters. Each side will have 15 minutes for the main arguments, and then they will have an additional 5 minutes for rebuttal and surrebuttal. I will make a note or alert the speakers when they have 5 minutes left for main arguments and 1 minute left for rebuttal and surrebuttal. And I should also note that interruptions, objections, and points of information will not be allowed. Now, on the second task, on how you can participate, your most important job is that you decide the debate, you decide on the result. Now, we thought about having a traditional simply voting on which side prevailed, but we thought we would spice it up a little bit and take your views at the beginning of the debate before you hear from the debaters, and then afterwards, and use that as a measure of how persuasive the two sides have been. So just before the debate starts, you'll get a poll question on your screens, and we'll take that result. And then after you've heard from the debaters, not just yet, please, it's a bit too early. If you can, Laciac, if you can take away the poll. We're not quite ready for the poll. I see it already here. I'll cue you when we're ready for it. Almost there, but that's what you see just before the debate starts and then after the debate. The second way that you can participate is via asking questions. Now you can use the Q&A function on Zoom. Most of you will be familiar with that by now. And we will pick some of the questions after the debate itself, when the debaters will come out of their roles and have a Q&A discussion on the questions that you will pose. So please do take the time to ask questions and even make comments if you have them. Now, my final task is to introduce the debaters. And this, I fear, if I did it in the completely thorough way, would take all the 40 minutes of the debate. So I will simply highlight a few things about the speakers and encourage you to look them up. I think they will be familiar to most of you, so will not need much introduction. But just to highlight the speakers, proposing the motion will be Professor Dr. Mohammed Abdel Wahab, who is the founding partner of Zulfikar & Partners in Cairo. He's also a professor of private international law at Cairo University in Egypt. Professor Abdel Wahab is also the Dean of the African Arbitration Academy and will be known to many of the people in the audience this morning, and is also Vice President of the ICC International Court of Arbitration. Mohammed is also a member of the governing board of the International Council for Commercial Arbitration, known as ICA, amongst many, many other accolades and responsibilities. And you will see in front of you Mohammed's biography, which I will not take the time to read, but just gives you a flavor of the breadth of Mohammed's experience and the breadth of his active responsibility in the arbitration community, not just in Africa, but around the world. And opposing the motion will be Mr. Jacob Grierson. Jacob is a partner at Asafo & Co., which is a Pan-African law firm with offices in Abidjan, Casablanca, Mombasa, Nairobi, and Paris. In addition to all of his work at Asafo & Co., Jacob is also the Vice President of the Casablanca International Mediation and Arbitration Center in Morocco, and is a member of the steering committee of the Users Council of the Mauritius International Arbitration Center. You will see in front of you a screen with not Mohammed, but rather Jacob's fuller biography. And again, you will see the breadth of his experience in international arbitration across the world, his responsibilities, including teaching, writing, and so forth. So I will not read it word for word. You will be able to find this information afterwards or to read at your leisure. But the point of all of this is really to show you that you have in front of you two very experienced, formidable international arbitration practitioners who have promised us a treat in debating this topic today. So listen attentively, maintain an open mind, and we will now go straight to the poll, if we can call that up. So you will have the poll in front of you, which says virtual hearings are good for international arbitration and should be mandated. That's the motion we have today, and you are asked to agree or disagree. I think the debaters should not vote, but may do so if they wish to.
I think we cannot vote.
Quite. So please go ahead and vote. And we should be able to see, I believe, the results coming up shortly. Laciac, perhaps we can have an indication on whether the poll has stopped and get the results up on the screens. Okay, so we have it there. We have 74% agree with the motion and 26% disagree with the motion. So from this result, we see that Jacob has quite a task ahead of him this morning, but I believe that he is up to it. And with that, We will start the debate. Mohammed, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Danga. It's a pleasure to join you today, and I'm very grateful for my esteemed friend and learned colleague, Jacob Grierson, for joining us today. Let me say that one would assume that my work today is done with this poll, but I'm more interested into the 26%, and I will try to convince them to convert. Let me start by echoing the words of Ms. Akeredolu, who said, pandemic has encouraged us to embrace innovative means. Virtual hearings are not new to international arbitration. If that is the case, I wonder what we are debating today. The motion is virtual hearings are good for international arbitration and should be mandated. I am supporting the motion, and let me start by the words of the very well-known Roman philosopher and statesman Cicero, who once said, nothing is more admirable or noble than advancing a just cause and being able, through speech, to drive people away from ideas that are both unhelpful and regressive. Nothing is more pleasing to me and to the mind and the heart than hearing distinguished and refined thoughts by wise and impressive intellects, including by my learned colleague, Jacob Grierson. Nothing is more powerful, more splendid, more regal, more magnanimous than lending aid to those in distress, raising up the afflicted, and offering people options to use and leading them to new horizons by dusting off misconceptions and dispensing with unwarranted skepticism. My role today is to support the just, fair, and wise proposition that virtual hearings are good for international arbitration and should be mandated, and to persuade you to follow the path of righteousness by endorsing this proposition. I will do the following. I will present you with 5 sets of arguments that will include no less than about 30 arguments, fully each and every one in support of the motion. I will do so in 15 minutes or under. But before I so proceed, I wish to state that it is a very rare treat in any debate to have on one side the logic, the facts, the law, the practice, and the future. I modestly submit to you that my proposition combines all. Since the motion primarily focuses on elements of goodness, I would like to think that I'm on the side of goodness. We need to consider how we measure this goodness in terms of virtual hearings. And speaking in terms of management, development, and performance management studies, virtual hearings are part of a process, a service. So a 4-step test applies to measure this goodness. The steps are: who defines the quality of the process, goodness? What is the overall assessment of the process? What are the specific attributes of virtual hearings that matter most and add value? Whether virtual hearings are capable of fulfilling those most important attributes. To measure and evidence the goodness of virtual hearings in accordance with this 4-step test, I will succinctly submit the 5 sets of arguments that I promise to cover policy and pragmatism in relation to virtual hearings. These include conceptual manifestations, logical and rational indications, factual validations and practical applications, legal considerations, and future contemplations. Starting with the conceptual manifestations, virtual hearings are still hearings. We need to remind ourselves sometimes of the basics. Virtual hearings are still in-person hearings where the same persons appear on screens, though not physically touchable. Virtual hearings are generally more time efficient, cost effective, and so they address the time and cost concerns that have plagued international arbitration for decades. Virtual hearings allow international arbitration to achieve more and advance the diversity cause beyond the traditional gender-based focus. It enables arbitrators with mobility disabilities or those coming from distant localities or even those with limited ability to travel and secure entry visas to conveniently be appointed based on intellect and equal opportunity rather than logistical considerations that have acted as barriers for many years. Virtual hearings reduce the carbon footprint and lead to greener arbitrations. Virtual hearings offer an additional option to users, and in management sciences, users, customers, and clients normally prefer options. The psychology of choice is a reality. It permits more positive competition and leads to better services. Virtual hearings are technology-based, and it would be conceptually unsound if on a macro level, technology-based processes are labeled as bad or inappropriate. What COVID-19 has conceptually done is exposing the fallacy and inefficiency of monotonous and monolithic practices that are evolution resistant. Moving on to the second subset, the logical and rational indications. Over the past 4 months, physical distancing due to COVID-19 has tested our will and resilience as humans. We lived our lives indoors, doing our work online, being educated and educating online, examining students online, defending PhD theses online, conferencing online, debating online, interacting online, prosecuting cases online. So how is it logically possible that virtual hearings become an issue for international arbitration? Wholly online dispute resolution processes have existed for at least 15 years, if not more, in the online dispute resolution field. I know this for a fact because I've been involved in the field since 2001, and I mean the online dispute resolution field. And there is no logical reason to suggest that a virtual hearing component in a traditional arbitration process would not work. Several arbitral institutions have dedicated online arbitration rules where the process is wholly conducted online, so it would be irrational and illogical to suggest that a virtual hearing component would not work for traditional offline arbitration. Virtual hearings through teleconferencing or video conferencing have worked well for case management conferences, procedural meetings, interim applications, considerations of production of document requests, deliberations between tribunal members. So it would be illogical and irrational to suggest that they would not work for merit hearings. Measuring the goodness of virtual hearings is a process-based and not a content-based test. It would be irrational and illogical to suggest that international arbitration is incapable of embracing technology-based processes and applications when each and every international arbitration stakeholder advocates for progress, evolution, and adaptability of international arbitration. Courts have conducted court hearing sessions online, including in criminal matters, and we have a precedent in Nigeria. So virtual hearings in civil and commercial arbitrations cannot be logically and rationally challenged. On the logical and rational indications, no rational or logical challenge to virtual hearings has ever been made. Moving to the factual validations and practical applications, virtual hearings have been wholly embraced, sanctified, and championed by many corporate users, practitioners, scholars, arbitral institutions, associations, and think tanks through rules, protocols, and guidelines, including the Africa Arbitration Academy, the ICC, which recorded a record caseload even amidst of the pandemic and the physical distancing, befitting of the existence of virtual hearings, the LCIA, ICSID, SCC, SIAC, Hong Kong International Arbitration Center, the Cairo Regional Center, DIFC, LCIA, the DIAC, the Vienna International Arbitration Center, the Milan Chamber, the American Arbitration Association, CPR, and the list goes on. They can't all be wrong. Virtual hearings have demonstrated the adaptability of international arbitration at times of crisis, when court systems have failed to live up to the expectations of users, at least for some time. It has given international arbitration an edge that those who oppose the motion now wish to take it away. Many dedicated platforms and service providers, many dedicated platforms and service providers have invested and are investing in virtual hearing applications and services. They also cannot be wrong. Virtual hearings have been very successful over the past 4 months. This forced unaccounted for pilot testing shows that virtual hearings work and they're good. A recent empirical study in July 2020, and I submit it's not on record, by Gary Bourne, Annalise Day, and Hafiz Verji, shows that the prevalence of fully remote hearings in the second quarter of 2020 was over 10 times greater than any times previously. I submit in transparency that I know this because it's going to be published in a forthcoming book entitled Remote International Arbitration, the COVID-19 Revolution, a Journal of International Arbitration special publication that is edited by my esteemed colleagues Maxi Scherer, Nusha Basiri, and myself. Evidence shows that virtual hearings are generally easier to schedule. Having participated in virtual hearings, it is clear that participants are more focused, efficient, and make better use of time. How is this not good? What COVID-19 has done, again, has exposed the fallacy that I referred to earlier. Moving to the legal considerations, I'm not aware of skeptics speaking of outright illegality of virtual hearings. Skeptics voice certain untested risks of challenge to arbitral awards if virtual hearings take place, but there is not a single reported case where an award has been set aside or denied enforcement to virtual hearings taking place. I'm not even aware of a national law or statute that prohibits virtual hearings. I'm aware of the contrary, those providing for the use of technology or silent on the matter, leaving it to the discretion of tribunals and parties, including recently the UAE arbitration law and the Jordanian amendment to the Arbitration Act, which provide for the use of technology. Skeptics of virtual hearings refer to risks that challenge the validity and enforceability of arbitral awards. But when you look at those risks, they are not attributed to virtual hearings per se, but are specific applications of breaches of due process that arise from specific case-sensitive considerations, not of virtual hearings per se. In a world where court hearings are increasingly taking place online, it is difficult to perceive of a situation where a court would set aside or decline to enforce an arbitral award purely on the basis of virtual hearings taking place, especially when most, if not all, arbitration statutes do not make hearings mandatory. If a hearing is not mandatory as a matter of law, how can a physical mode of the hearing be mandatory? Future contemplations. The COVID-19 crisis has catalyzed the transformation of international arbitration and accelerated its path of evolution through embracing virtual hearings as a technology-based component. For skeptics and those opposed to the motion, I say, cheer up, the worst is yet to come. And international arbitration must be prepared to survive, evolve, and innovate if the field is destined to continue to thrive and live up to the expectations of its users. In simple Darwinian logic, the survival of international arbitration hinges upon its ability to adapt to changes, and procedural fixations threaten this very premise for survival. If we cannot learn from the past, reflect on the present, there will be no future. Virtual hearings have been international arbitration's wild card to success in times of crisis, has been the arbitration community snowpiercer that was not stopped by COVID-19 when the court systems suffered a halt for some time at least. Given the exponential growth of investments in ICT and technology-based applications for virtual hearings, the process of international arbitration will witness greater strides on the path of evolution. International arbitration cannot afford a regression not befitting of its progressive phase. Progress is based on a universal, innate desire on the part of all arbitration stakeholders to survive and revive the legacy of international arbitration as a truly prominent global dispute resolution process. AI and IA cannot be coincidental inverse acronyms. They signify the glistening evolutionary path of international arbitration. If courts are moving online and adapting their practice. Will arbitration lag behind? Your choice, your call. It's time to kick into higher gear, get into the groove and make headway. Wisdom calls for reflection, contemplation, and proactive actions. Vote for the motion. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mohammed, for that start and for sticking perfectly to your 15 minutes. We will now hear from the opposition. Jacob, will you be following the path of righteousness and conceding the motion?
Of course.
Jacob,
No,
you have the
I'm not
floor.
conceding the motion.
You have the floor. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Danga. And first of all, let me thank Laciac for organizing this wonderful event. I'm really, truly proud to be pitted against the legendary Prof, as I now know him to be called, my friend Mohammed Abdel Wahab. It's truly an honor. And I'm very relieved to have my other friend, Danga Kamau, here to protect me if things get a little bit tough, as I anticipate they may do. I'm also really grateful to the organizers for choosing this truly fascinating and topical motion, which in my view goes to the very heart of many of the issues that make international arbitration what it is. The need to achieve justice, the imperative of respecting the parties' agreement, the need to avoid delay and unnecessary expense, and all the same at the same time respecting the all-important due process. And I'm particularly grateful to the organizers for having caused me genuinely to change my mind on the question of virtual or remote hearings. If you'd asked me just a few weeks ago what I thought of them, I would have said, just as my friend Mohammed said much more eloquently, they are the future. Undoubtedly, I would have said that. If you'd asked me what I thought of people who oppose them, I would have said they're just old fogies with dreadful white beards. I'm not one of them, am I? If you'd asked me whether there were problems with virtual hearings, I would have said, sure, there are some problems, but they can all be overcome. They're not real problems. But then, thanks to Laciac, I really thought about the issues. And I realized that there are real problems. And I don't think that they're ones that can, in fact, all be overcome. And I believe that they're ones that could do serious harm to what, in my view, is at the very core of international arbitration. Now, first of all, let me say there are a number of problems that clearly can be overcome. So I just mentioned these in passing because I think that I'm not sure that Mohammed did refer to these, but I believe that these are ones that can be overcome, and certainly with the ingenuity that we all have within the international arbitration community, I think we can overcome them. First of all, obviously issues of cybersecurity, the risk of hearings and document management systems being hacked into, and the risk of uninvited persons crashing hearings, much as they did for some of my children's Zoom classes just before the summer. But again, I'm sure we can find solutions to these problems where it's only been a few months since the COVID crisis began, and already huge progress has been made. So that's not a major issue. Then, of course, the problem of poor internet connections, which certainly for myself has been the bane of my existence for the past few months. So having said that, I count myself very lucky because others have obviously had much more serious problems than that. How often have meetings had to be interrupted because someone's connection just wasn't good enough? In a hearing, of course, this takes on a whole other dimension. You're in the middle of your killer point in cross-examination when all of a sudden the witness's connection goes down, or has it really gone down? Well, again, this will no doubt, thanks to ingenious innovation in AI and IT and other acronyms like that, will no doubt have that resolved too within the next few years. Then there's the problem, of course, of the time zones. How do you hold a hearing with parties from Lagos and Beijing without one of them having to get up either very early in the morning or the other going to bed very late at night? But again, we'll find solutions. We'll find some medicines. We'll soon have the Abdel Wahab special concoction that we'll take in order to help us get through the night or get up very early in the morning. So that, again, I'm not too worried about. And then, of course, the problem of witnesses being coached or helped in real time while they're giving their evidence. Now, I used to think that this was a little bit exaggerated. Do they really sit in rooms with somebody out of sight of the camera in the corner of the room, giving them the answers, holding out flashcards saying this is the right answer, it's yes or it's no? Well, I'm told that this can and in reality does in fact happen all too often. But again, we'll find a solution. You can always send somebody to sit in the room with a witness. It's rather expensive, but you can do that. Or you can invest in one of those very expensive 360-degree cameras, which apparently allows you to see everything in the room. I'm not quite sure how they work. Maybe Mohammed has one of those with him. And I don't quite know who does the checking. I suppose you ask one member of the legal team to be scouting around the room the whole time. I would have thought that's rather distracting. But again, these are details. We'll get over that. We'll find a solution. Then, of course, there's the problem of shorter attention spans. Now, I was surprised to hear Mohammed, with whom I agree on almost everything in general. I was surprised to hear him say towards the end of his presentation that in fact by video conference people are more focused. I think that the fact that you can so easily answer your emails while you're listening to someone speaking on Zoom, yes, Danga, I know you're doing that right now. I can see your eyes moving across the screen. That I would have thought that means that tribunals will listen less carefully to counsel submissions and to witnesses' evidence. Again, I'm sure we'll find a solution to that. Maybe somebody will develop a software that will give Danga a little electric shock when she wanders off from the party's submissions. But more seriously, I think we will undoubtedly end up having shorter hearing days with more breaks, for which at least the stenographers will be very grateful. Speaking of solutions, and I've begun to suggest a number of solutions to those, as I said, relatively minor problems that I just mentioned. A number of solutions have already been proposed by various bodies. Mohammed referred to those. Everybody has jumped on the bandwagon, as it were, to show how proactive they're being about this. But I would like to take this opportunity to congratulate the Africa Arbitration Academy for its protocol on virtual hearings in Africa, because theirs was, as far as I'm aware, truly one of the very first protocols to come out. And frankly, it contains some very sensible ideas. But with the greatest respect to the AAA and others, what worries me about that protocol and all the other protocols is the added layers of complexity that they bring to the arbitral process. And this is where I come to my real concern and why I am indeed genuinely opposed to virtual or remote hearings. International arbitration is, to my mind, supposed to be a flexible and informal process, one that enables people from potentially very different cultures and very different legal backgrounds all to feel at home, to feel that they're not playing the proverbial away game. With virtual or remote hearings, we will lose the flexibility and informality that we have worked so hard to build up. Why? Because in order to deal with the kinds of problems that I've referred to, we'll have to put in place rigid rules of the type proposed with the best will in the world by the AAA. You'll have rules on the type of computer you have to have, and where your camera must be, on when you're allowed to speak, on how long you're allowed to speak for, and when you're not allowed to speak. The list will be endless. It'll be like going back to the High Court in London, in my case, and whichever courts those distinguished attendees of this webinar often appear before. And that's not what arbitration is about. But in addition to that, you will also lose the, what I call the no away game effect, the feeling that everybody's playing at home. And why is that, you may well ask? Won't Zoom actually level everything out? Won't it make it easier for an African lawyer to take on a Wall Street lawyer in an arbitration in New York? That's the point that Mohammed was making a little earlier. Well, unfortunately, it won't. Signal things to the tribunal.
Jacob, we've lost you. Jacob, we lost you for the last 30 seconds or so.
Can you hear me now?
We can.
Fantastic. Well, let me, I don't know exactly when you lost me, and I'm sorry, it's probably my link. What I wanted to say was that you will lose the no away game effect of arbitration, the feeling that everyone's playing at home.
5 minutes.
Thank
Sorry
you
for the interruption.
Not at all. Very helpful. And what I wanted to say was that that may seem like a surprising proposition. After all, Mohammed very eloquently explained that among many other things, virtual remote hearings will allow greater diversity. It'll help the mobility impaired people to travel around. It'll help people geographically to reach other areas that they might have had great difficulty reaching otherwise. And so indeed one might think that it'll make it easier, for example, for an African lawyer to take on a Wall Street lawyer in a New York hearing. But the reality, when you think about it, is actually quite different. And the reality is that Zoom hearings, I make it simple, no, it's not all by Zoom, but virtual hearings give the arbitration insider a massive advantage. They allow the arbitration insider to signal things to the tribunal in a way that the arbitration outsider won't even notice. And why will he or she not notice? Because he or she won't see the interaction that is going on between the counsel, who's a well-known arbitration insider, be it the prof or whoever else, and the well-known arbitrator that is typically appointed in, for example, ICC arbitration, something like Danga. The insider speaks the same language as the tribunal. And in a virtual or remote hearing, that effect is amplified massively. Above all, the reality, whether we like it or not, is that the insider is trusted by the tribunal in a way that the outsider isn't. It's fair enough. The insider is known and therefore trusted, or perhaps not trusted, but if he's still in the business, it's probably that he or she is trusted. The outsider hasn't yet earned that trust. The tribunal hasn't yet got the feel for the person. The in-person, the physical hearing allows that to some extent to be put right. The tribunal gets to know the outsider and learns to trust him or her. And that happens not only during the formal sessions of the hearing, but also during the breaks. It happens when the tribunal crosses paths with the outsider at the hotel or on the way to the hearing center. A virtual or remote hearing allows for none of that. And the result is that the outsider remains the outsider. So, ladies and gentlemen, if you want arbitration to retain its flexibility and informality, everything that we've worked so hard to build up, if you want it to remain the great leveler of geographical and cultural and legal differences, that means that there are truly no outsiders in the world of international arbitration, only insiders, then please, please vote against this motion. I urge you to overcome my friend, the prof's superior advocacy skills, his reference to Roman thinkers who I've only vaguely heard of. Don't let the supreme insider that he is bamboozle you. Vote, ladies and gentlemen, for justice and fairness. You will not regret it.
Thank you very much, Jacob, for the opposition's arguments. We note carefully that you arranged a demonstration of the challenges of virtual hearings by freezing your equipment at precisely 9 minutes and 30 seconds. So that's noted. The moderator also notes your attempts to slander her abilities to multitask, and will be taking legal advice on next steps. But more seriously, before we get to the rebuttal stage of this debate, I encourage the participants to ask questions. I know that you have been captivated by the debaters' arguments thus far and will continue to be so captivated with the rebuttal, but please do ask questions, because we have set aside some time after the debate where the debaters will engage with you, or with your questions at least, out of character. So that should be an interesting part of this session today. So do take the time to type out some questions while you listen to the rebuttal. And with that, I hand the floor back to Mohammed to rebut the opposition's arguments. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Danga. It's been a great pleasure hearing my learned colleague, Jacob. I will be as brief as possible by saying the following. I will not address the minor problems that he kindly acknowledged that could be overcome, because that would be a waste of time for everyone, because they do not pose a challenge. Secondly, the problems that have been voiced either in relation to security, witness tampering, checking emails during the hearings, we have all come across this in physical hearings, so it is not virtual hearing specific. I do note with appreciation the need to achieve justice and avoid delay and unnecessary expense. But let me start with his final words. If you want arbitration to retain its flexibility, oppose the motion. I just wonder, how can arbitration retain its flexibility by being fixated on one procedural option, and one does not fit well with option, that is a physical hearing? Does flexibility not mean that we should have more than one option, and a flexibility of considering diverse opportunities for participants? And even though we do not have a live transcript, I did note that no less than 4 to 5 times the reference was made to Zoom hearings. These are platform-specific objections and not objections to virtual hearings at large. The real concern, as voiced by my learned colleague, are the added layers of complexity. And I must admit that part of the logic voiced goes beyond my intellect and may be superior to my ability to comprehend. But I will say the following. The added layers of complexity come from the fact when you have people in environments with which they're not familiar. Is it not the case that when we have witnesses, counsel, traveling and roaming the globe for hearings, they wish sometimes to see the hearing room before they enter and prosecute the case or appear to give evidence? The reason being, in basic anthropological, sociological, psychological studies, people are not comfortable as much with environments that they are not familiar with. And in virtual hearings, you get to perform better because you are prosecuting a case or appearing within the environment with which you're familiar, be it your home, your office, elsewhere. So performance is better. My learned colleagues' arguments are case-specific or practice-oriented, focused on certain technological mishaps, certain current practices in arbitration that are destined for change. It does not challenge the principle and will no doubt disappear with instantaneous advancements in technology and evolution in practices. And I would respectfully disagree that this will take years. The strides technology make are over weeks or months, and we see that when technology becomes obsolete. The leading arbitration practitioner Justin D'Agostino in his 18 June 2020 keynote speech during the first ever virtual annual workshop of the Institute of Transnational Arbitration, emphasized that online hearings will improve arbitration. And this is not a sole practitioner's view. Virtual hearings, he mentioned, to date have been more successful than many stakeholders anticipated. At the root of any voiced challenges is the fear of losing control of the arbitral process and lack of familiarity with technology we need to deploy. And I think my learned colleague has demonstrated that when he talked about the 360 degrees camera and other aspects with which he's not familiar. So I guess the challenges arise from our xenophobic considerations that we are moving out of our comfort zone. What COVID-19 has done is that given us a nudge. It's a catalyst that has forced us out of our comfort zones. Now, however, Justin adds, these feelings will dissipate as we become more used to online hearings. This is said at a time when technology was being unpreparedly used to fill a gap. So one can only think that with the advancement in ICTs and AI applications over the next few months, the future, ladies and gentlemen, is not coming. It is already here. As stated by Isaac Asimov, the famous American writer and professor of biochemistry, the saddest aspect of life right now is that science gathers knowledge faster than society gathers wisdom. The only reason why people get lost in thought and are skeptical about new ideas and practices, including virtual hearings, which, by the way, is not that new, is it is an unfamiliar territory for many, and we have been nudged out of that comfort zone. It does not require a genius to observe the present and see where the future is. It simply takes an average person to act accordingly without defying the winds of change that are powered by the sand of time. I would recommend to you to read Max Tegmark's, the MIT physicist, book Life 3.0, Being Human in the Age of Artificial Intelligence, where he refers to 3 stages of evolution. 1, the biological stage; 2, the cultural or civilization stage; and 3, the technological stage and how we can cope. To shut ourselves out of the future and what is inevitable is unwise. This motion is about truth, whether we like it or not. Contrary to what Oscar Wilde has once said, truth is never pure and rarely simple. This motion is about a very simple truth and a reality that wisdom calls for embracing and enhancing. Virtual hearings are good for arbitration. The matter is res ipsa loquitur. One cannot think of how arbitration practitioners, as leading intellectual figures of the legal community, will not support a motion that is wisdom-based, fact-oriented, legally sound, and futuristically rewarding for a field that is destined for greatness and progression. I do not purport to offer draconian verdicts. I'm simply trying to avert a miasma of despair. In our world, change is inevitable and is a constant reality. And virtual hearings do not necessarily call for an absolute rejection of a good practice. They can best serve as guiding markers where, on the virtual hearings discourse, catalyze innovation, ICTs, and virtual hearings application that best serves the needs and interests of all the stakeholders. I do reserve my rights to costs, but I will say this: our practices are destined for a change. So measuring the goodness of virtual hearings by what is happening right now is probably not the best idea. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mohammed, for completing the proposition's arguments. And we now go to the opposition to wrap up the debate. And I note that Mohammed took about 2 extra minutes, so those will also be available to the opposition should it wish to make use of them. Jacob.
That's very kind, Danga. Thank you for that flexibility. I won't need that much time, and I have absolutely no problem with my friend Mohammed having taken a bit more time. After all, I'm the one who pressed for flexibility, and it's such a pleasure to hearing such a beautiful, and I mean this generally, such a beautiful way of expressing these thoughts. and to hear Latin, because one doesn't hear that much Latin spoken anymore, at least not in my home, unfortunately. So it's a real pleasure to hear that. But it does rather emphasize, I think, and perhaps prove my point that this is an insider's game. There we have the prof, the consummate insider, speaking Latin, citing all these amazing books that none of us have, citing acronym upon acronym. It's an insider's game, and the virtual hearing is going to make that worse. And I didn't hear any answer against that as to why this won't be an insider's game. What I did hear was something I thought rather unfortunate, which is that apparently everybody checks their emails during hearings. I'd like to point out I don't do that. Joking aside, I'm sure that Mohammed and Danga don't either. But actually, on a serious note, I think that it is a real problem. Any kind of I won't use Zoom because Mohammed rightly points out that it's not platform specific, but any kind of virtual hearing, there is a risk of multitasking, and I'm sure Danka wasn't doing it before, but she could have, and we wouldn't really have noticed because she's got that thing with her eyes where she can read her emails without us really seeing. In a hearing, in a physical hearing, it's a little more difficult to do that, to be busy typing away at the same time as somebody is giving evidence. So that's on the multitasking emails point. And then just one other point, Mohammed said that we actually perform better in our home environments. Well, I think that may have something to do with the fact that Mohammed's family is a little bit older than mine, but I definitely do not perform so well in a home environment. So please get me to my office when I have a hearing to be done. Just a final point, if I may. I am deeply upset that Mohammed has not made, or at least conceded, the one really truly killer point that's on my side, which I haven't yet made, which is that it will be truly a shame when we have only virtual hearings that I won't get to see Mohammed and Danga coming to Paris as much as they used to. I will miss both of you when you insist on your position that everything has to be done virtually. If you change your mind, I will forgive you and you can come and I'll be happy to have a meal with both of you. Thank you, and thank you to everybody among the participants. I'm happy to answer any questions that may come.
Thank you very much. Mohammed, was that your hand up to?
Yes, because there was an argument made in the post-hearing that was never made before, and I would like to respond briefly. I'm not going to say anything other than my motion is not about presenting virtual hearings as the only way. I'm simply saying it is good option to add it to physical hearings.
Thank you very much. Okay, we see
just on a point
things
of order,
are getting spicy.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Yeah, on a point of order, there was in fact in the motion, unless it's been changed since I last looked at it, something about them being mandated, which doesn't sound very optional to me.
Thank you, Jacob. And I was going to come to that while abusing my position as moderator before we go to the Q&A, to ask the debaters to respond to especially to that point, because there are two propositions in the motion. The first is that virtual hearings are good for international arbitration, and I think that's been thoroughly addressed by the debaters. But the second part on being mandated, I'm not sure that I got clear positions from the two sides. So perhaps if we could get a 15-second articulation of the propositions arguments on that bit before we go to the Q&A. And that might clear up this so-called post-hearing new argument. Thank you. Well, Mohammed, briefly.
Thank you. Very, very briefly, mandated to me is that they are required. It is no longer open to a party out of convenience and preference to say, I don't want virtual hearings. They need to substantiate their position as to why, for that specific case, it may not work. Otherwise, it presents itself as a default option alongside anything else. So it's a requirement, but not an exclusive requirement.
Thank you, Mohammed. Jacob?
So, are we in role here, or
still in role?
Okay.
Yes.
Okay. So on the mandated point, obviously it follows from what I've said about the problems inherent in virtual hearings that they shouldn't be mandated. But even if I were to take the position that Mohammed has pushed for, which is that they are the future, they're a good thing, then obviously I don't, and I think I agree with Mohammed and pretty much everybody else, that they should not be forced upon two parties that do not want it, who happen to have taken the view that I've been espousing. If one of the parties, without very good reason, were to object to a virtual hearing, and the tribunal thought that in fact this was the right way to go, then of course I believe that, well, not of course, but I do believe that a tribunal has the power to mandate that.
Okay. Thank you very much to both debaters. We'll now move into the Q&A session. And some of the questions you will see will relate to sort of in-role arguments. So you will have to, while you take off your role hats, you will have to kind of go back to them to respond. And the first I will address to Jacob, because I think this is a point that you made several times, is a question that comes from Nkiru Agbu. And Nkiru asks, could you please clarify who the outsider and insiders are? Thank you.
Well, the insiders in the arbitration world, the international arbitration world, are those who you will find listed on the courts of various arbitration institutions. Those that attend, they're invited to speak at all the conference, the usual conferences. It's the usual suspects, and it's a relatively small community, even though it's a truly international community. It is a relatively small community, and to my mind, one of the great things in arbitration is that because, in fact, there aren't terribly complicated rules. It's not like going before a national court where you need to know the rules backwards, and not only know the rules but also know how they're actually applied by whom, etc. In international arbitration, anybody can appear, and frankly I've often been up against opponents who are not what I would describe as insiders, and they've done I'd say a very good job and been very effective, and as I mentioned before, it seems to me that the in-person hearing, the physical in-person hearing, is a very good way of bringing them into the community, making them less outsiders, allowing them to interact more effectively with the arbitral tribunal, and getting rid of this sort of insider-outsider effect that you otherwise have.
Thank you, Jacob. A related question, which comes from an Indian lawyer, Samir Thakur, asks, do the debaters not think that virtual hearings will deepen the hegemony of certain law firms, so that, and I won't read the whole question, it's quite long, but this idea that having virtual hearings will entrench the more traditional law firms, European, more British law firms, in participating in international arbitration? And I guess this relates to this insider-outsider question that or argument that Jacob is proposing. And perhaps we can start with Mohammed on that point. What's your response to this concern on the entrenchment of certain law firms and participants in international arbitration?
Well, I would have thought that the virtual work works in my favor and for the motion, to tell you the truth, because what has happened is that the pool across all matters has actually broadened with moving virtually. We see more fresh blood infused into the arbitration community. Many newcomers and new people are becoming increasingly more known online compared to a physical, usual suspects, close type of argument. We see this, it's taking place, and you don't need to have evidence to support that. It's just facts. You just look around and you know that there are more people are more familiar now and become more known in an online environment. Additionally, I thought, in relation to our colleagues, Mr. Thakur's question about the entrenchment, I would have thought the opposite. I think with the global firms and mega firms that have physical presence in 90 plus jurisdictions or more, the opportunity for domestic, regional, and specially focused or specialized firms moving online, it gives them an edge and an opportunity. You don't need to invest in physical assets anymore. You can have a global outreach if you offer the right and good quality services. So it gives them an edge, as a matter of fact. And this is not new. When you look at the online business, those who are successful at the online business are not necessarily the traditional mega corporate companies, but are people who have done extremely well in an online world and have been extremely competitive with those who were dominating the physical world. So transplanting this into international arbitration, I think it does work for the motion. It allows us for a more broader pool across the board.
Jacob, what's your response to that?
I think that the answer is indeed implicit in the question. I think there is a real risk that the increasing need for technological superiority will give the larger firms the lead. But I say that with some reticence. I mean, I do understand that, in fact, in many cases, technology can help the smaller players, the solo practitioners. Certainly, in a different context, the ability to use software to present evidence bundles, etc., has definitely meant that you don't need to have the paralegal or the teams of paralegals that really set aside the bigger firms before. That goes against my point. But I think that in terms of running the virtual hearing, we'll find that having the big team behind the scenes that's able to cope with all this technology, that's able to give the support to the person who's pleading, may be increased. But I'm not quite sure.
So, thank you, Jacob. If we go back to the question on the mandating, I think we've seen that there are several questions that are focusing on this part of the motion that queries whether virtual hearings should be mandated. Now, would your answers change if one of the parties objected, if both parties objected, if neither of the parties objected? Is there something in the parties' response to the question of virtual hearings that might alter your positions? And here you can step out of role, perhaps, for the purposes of this, of answering this question. Mohammed, if you want to start, and then we can
well, stepping out of my role now, I will simply refer to my written memorials by simply saying that I have the pandemic pathway that I tried as an attempt to develop to assist tribunals. And simply saying on the mandated point is the following. The idea is that previously we had no doubt that tribunals would probably impose a teleconference or a virtual hearing in relation to case management issues. But when it came to the merits and one party asked for a physical hearing, it is likely that tribunals would proceed with it, sometimes grudgingly so, but would proceed with it out of convenience and preference. What the COVID-19 has brought about is that now it has de facto shifted the burden of proof. Rather than one party now saying, I want to have a physical hearing, the party has to say why I need to have a physical hearing and a virtual hearing would not work. To me, this is the component of the mandated element. It is no longer a question of individual or unilateral convenience. It is simply, it has to be reasoned objection to a virtual hearing as to why it would not work in the specific case. So that to me does not challenge the motion as such. But tribunals, I'm yet to come across a law or a text that would prevent tribunals from proceeding with a virtual hearing with the objection of a party. I fundamentally agree, because I had this in one case, that if both parties do not wish to proceed with a virtual hearing, the tribunal should not proceed with a virtual hearing out of that rule. Because in one situation, other members of the tribunal felt, oh, no, let's go with the procedural hearing. I told them, no, the parties do not want it. They jointly said, we don't want to have a virtual hearing. So the next thing you'll hear from them, either they will suspend or terminate the case. This is a party autonomy driven process. But if one party objects and there are no reasons, credible reasons, to proceed virtually, then the tribunal could proceed virtually.
Thank you, Mohammed. Jacob?
I agree absolutely entirely with what Mohammed said. The only thing that I would just add is that one of the reasons why you might credibly object to having a virtual hearing is because you can't get your team together. And that was one of the problems that we had during the height of the COVID crisis. I had this in one particular case where the tribunal was very keen to press ahead with a virtual hearing. And in the end, actually, both parties agreed, so it fell into the category of what Mohammed mentioned, where clearly the tribunal shouldn't, and in that case did not go against what the parties had agreed. And why did they agree? It wasn't because they were worried about the particular points that I mentioned during my speech a moment ago. It was because we would not have been able to get together the participants, partly because we weren't at that time allowed to be together in a room, partly because the frontiers were closed between certain countries, and there is, to my mind, a real benefit in having teams together to plead. Now, having said that, a number of hearings did take place during the height of the COVID crisis, and do seem, and here I'm obviously out of role, do seem to have gone pretty well. And I was struck that actually, in particular, the English seem to have really taken to it in a big way. I suspect it may have something to do with the fact that the English are used to using barristers, QCs, to present cases who do a sort of bit of a one man or woman job, and so maybe it fitted in with that. They were there in their sitting room doing the hearing. That wasn't a problem. Speaking for myself, I rather like having a team around me, including people from the client, including the expert. I find it reassuring and very helpful to have that around me. So I would have thought that's a very legitimate ground for objecting to a remote hearing. But apart from that, I totally agree with what Mohammed has said.
Staying with you, Jacob, Anonymous asks, do we foresee hybrid virtual and physical hearings after this COVID-19 pandemic time?
I would have thought yes. I mean, I've had them in the past. In fact, I had one hearing where I was president of a tribunal, and where actually one of the parties was in a country a long way away from the place of arbitration, and said relatively late on, look, we don't think it's worth coming. But I think they put it more politely than that, but they let it be known that they were not intending to attend the hearing, and then I can't remember who suggested it, but it was suggested that could be done then by video conference. It was done. The hearing took place in London at the IDRC. I'm not a shareholder there, so I can say they did a great job of setting up the video link. It actually went extremely well. I realize that I'm here possibly reducing the number of people who vote in my favor on this motion, but it went extremely well. There were absolutely no problems. Although, I'm sorry, I haven't been clear. The other side was present in the hearing room, and obviously we, the tribunal, had ensured that the parties had agreed in writing to this way of proceeding, which otherwise could have been seen as quite unfair, and they did. That's how they wanted to do it in order to reduce costs, and as I said, it went perfectly well. So I can imagine, that's a supreme example of a hybrid hearing. I can imagine that could happen again in the future. I don't actually personally see that many problems with it.
Thanks, Jacob. And speaking of voting, we'll get to that soon, but I thought we should take a few more questions. Mohammed, I would ask you to respond on this question of a hybrid, but perhaps another question that has come from Madeleine Kimei might be appropriate at this point, which is this question whether we can expect to see any advancements on e-awards and e-enforcement in the future. If you could address that.
Of course. And I did address that partly in an article about 10 years ago, when I said that there was a new convention regarding the e-apostille, and it has only a couple of states at the time, including the Netherlands. The idea is that when we talk about free movement of people and free circulation of goods, I am anticipating there will be free circulation of awards. You will have awards rather than printing them, signing them, and going to a court to deposit for enforcement. They will roam the globe. And now we've seen that viruses stick on paper. So people are moving into a paperless society now. I foresee that in the very near future, we would extend that. So there will be free circulation of awards. So if in the seat of arbitration, let's say in Paris, France, you get an award, that award is electronic. It will be transmitted by the institution or the council or whoever to the court. The court will look into that. They would possibly decide the case and maybe transfer it to another court in another jurisdiction for enforcement. That would even reduce arguments about forgery of awards, about awards, you know, not being authentic or stuff like that. So I foresee that this is going to happen. It's just a matter of time. And this will also dispense for our, you know, for the need to physically sign each and every page of the award in certain parts of our world. So I see this happening.
Thank you. Jacob, any thoughts on that?
Yes, I mean, I entirely agree that this is what should happen. Obviously, there's no good reason why we shouldn't have electronic awards. They have a number of advantages. On the other hand, I think that we will require effectively a new New York Convention in order to achieve that, because at the moment I don't see that many people taking the risk of issuing an e-award when we already see how many difficulties there are in certain jurisdictions around the world with an award that hasn't been signed, initialed on every page. And I remember a happy occasion when Mohammed and I sat together and initialed an award together. I don't see people taking that risk. So until some new convention or new version of the New York Convention, whatever it is put in place. But other than that, I entirely agree.
Thank you very much, Jacob. We'll take one more question before we go to the vote. And you will have seen that there's a recurring question about technology. And I think Jacob raised this during his interventions when he queried the challenges that are brought on by virtual hearings. Now, the audience, I believe, is largely an African audience. So I would ask you to respond to this question on, really how practically can participants in international arbitration deal with these challenges to technology, and not just, internet connections, but also these issues of cybersecurity and so forth. And think about your response with respect to the different stakeholders. We have Laciac taking the initiative to host this kind of discussion, but what should institutions such as Laciac and others across the continent be doing to ensure that these challenges are overcome? And it's not just advice on this narrow point, but stepping back and thinking about this opportunity posed by virtual hearings. There is a perception that the use of virtual hearings could open up or democratize dispute resolution, so that we see an increase in the participation of Africans in international arbitration. So what should institutions, what should governments, what should practitioners and others be doing to ensure that Africa doesn't miss out on this opportunity of participating more actively in international dispute settlement? I don't know who wants to start. I'm
happy to. Yeah. I'm happy. Let me say the following, and again, this is in all honesty. Those who are involved in ICT studies long ago and intersection with law would know that countries that are either underdeveloped or developing have done extremely well by embracing technology. Looking, for example, at Nepal and the Philippines and other states, they have had excellent use of mobile phones and applications to compensate for the need of physical infrastructure that is too costly for states to instill. I had in mind with the virtual hearings, the idea, or at least with ICT, it gives Africans, Latin Americans, Asians, and other people in distant localities an edge, the ability to contribute to the economy and compete. Because with the advent of technology, cost immediately gets reduced when a new technology is out there. The variation, of course, in technological capabilities does exist, but is it not the same, like linguistic capabilities, investment in infrastructure, physical, one way or the other? Look in international arbitration with African brothers and sisters prosecuting a case against a mega magic circle firm, and they do an excellent job. It's not simply a function of financial resources, but having minimum resources available, coupled with the quality, may indeed compensate for this. And technology gives this opportunity, a window of hope to participate. Many of our brothers and sisters do not have the money to travel abroad or to prosecute cases in distant locations. If you do that virtually, they are more than capable of expressing their intellectual thoughts and skills and utilizing it to the interests of their clients, let alone, as I mentioned, those with disabilities and inability to obtain visas. It does give this opportunity and broaden the pool of practitioners more generally. And finally, I think it has been a millennium development goal to invest in ICTs and e-government services and e-platforms. So extending this to arbitration would not be something exceptional. It is inevitable, unavoidable, and ultimately it's a worthwhile investment because it will reduce time and cost. And with that, and before the voting, and I fully agree with Jacobs, now we've taken the hat off, I recently am sitting in a major case where one party has put in a memorial of about 20 plus pages about why they can't proceed with a certain component of the hearing virtually. And we unanimously as a tribunal thought that that was an excellent submission, and we decided to postpone that component. So the opening submissions virtually and stuff, but a certain component for the hearing was very well reasoned why we cannot proceed virtually. So again, the point is case specific, rather than previously saying, oh no, my preference is that we don't proceed. It is time and cost efficient in a way, but certainly tribunals should be open to the logic that it may not work for each and every case.
Thank you, Mohammed. Jacob, your thoughts on this?
Thanks, Danga. On the question of what arbitral institutions, and particularly those in Africa, can do to help in this respect. First of all, adapting the rules to make it clear that using technology is permissible, and that there won't be any issues in relation to, there shouldn't be any issues in relation to enforceability, is important, because of course the rules are what the parties have agreed to. The rules become part of the parties' agreement, and it's difficult for parties to argue once they've agreed to be bound by the rules, that something in those rules that says that a hearing, including a merits hearing, may take place by Zoom or whatever, is perfectly okay. It's difficult for them to argue the contrary later on. So I think that's one thing that institutions can do. Another thing, just on a very practical level, which certainly a number of institutions can do, including within Africa, is to have in their hearing centers places from which parties and their representatives can do hearings. In Casablanca, where I'm quite involved, we're in the process of setting up those sort of Zoom booths. They're not called Zoom booths, but that's the idea, from which a party can actually do its hearing. And I think those are going to be particularly useful for the period during which parties and their lawyers don't yet have the necessary technology in their offices. The arbitral institutions will really play an important role in helping them to perform effectively in these hearings, because the reality is that it's not quite as simple as sitting in front of your laptop when you're on vacation like I am right now, and doing it, you need your 3 screens, you need the very high quality internet connection, you need to be together with a number of other people. It's a whole rigmarole, and I think that arbitral institutions can help to put in place that rigmarole and take that out of the hands of the lawyers who are being paid not to run the technology, but to make good arguments.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Jacob and Mohammed, for your participation in these questions. We are now at the moment of truth. We'll be running the poll for the second time. A reminder that the results in the first instance were 74% were for the motion and 26% against the motion. We will see what the powers of persuasion by our debaters have led to. Laciac, if you could put the poll up. Give a little bit of time to ponder. Okay, perhaps we can stop it now and see the results. Well, we have exactly the same result as we did before.
We have both failed.
Suspiciously. So I would say that while we have had a fantastic morning, neither of the speakers have managed to persuade you to change your minds either way. So perhaps this
just
is
as well continued. We weren't doing that unsuccessfully.
Perhaps this is to be continued in a second round. Perhaps there will be a re-debate. But it remains for me to thank the debaters for their active participation this morning. Thank you very much for sharing your insights and taking on these roles 100% and wholeheartedly. I also would like to thank the audience for joining us this morning and for your active participation, not just in voting and remaining steadfast in your views, even though I encouraged you to remain open-minded, but also for asking questions. I'm sorry we could not get to all the questions, but I hope that we managed to answer a few of the concerns which you have, or the questions that you have on this topic. And also to thank the organizers for making this happen. Congratulations to Laciac, and to encourage you all to look out for future debates. I think they promise to be on stimulating topics, and I certainly will be logging on to hear the future debates. And with that, I would like to hand back to Laciac for closing remarks. I think I've kept almost to time. So
I want to thank you, Danga, for your able moderation, and to thank my esteemed friend and colleague, Jacob, for taking on this task and for accepting to appear with me on this. And it's been a great pleasure, and thanks to Laciac for their excellent organization. I have nothing more to say, but to thank all the participants for their very useful and insightful comments and questions, which I'm happy, of course, to address, separately in the networking breakout session. When
absolutely, absolutely. This should not be the end of these conversations. And I suppose just on that point, I think just to look back, and I'm being naughty and taking up more time after congratulating myself for my discipline, just to recall that these debates are really to discuss issues, but also to take action. So not just to spend the morning having a nice morning listening to these discussions, but to really take on some of these tips that you've heard from the debaters, and really a call on the institutions and stakeholders across the continent to move this forward. We should not be having a discussion 5 years from now and saying how we missed the opportunity to be active participants in virtual hearings or in virtual international dispute settlements. So let's really take this on and do something about it. And with that, I shall stop and hand over to Laciac. Thank you.
Hello. Maya. Hello, everyone. Thank you. Following from such an intellectually stimulating debate, it's going to be a morning of thanks. Everyone is thanking, and yeah, I'll go through my thanks as well. So my task is to say goodbye, but before I do that, I would roll out my thanks. So first off, I'd like to thank the debaters. Thank you, the debaters and the moderator, Ndanga. Thank you so much, because we contacted you, there was zero hesitation. You immediately said, of course, yes, we'll do it. And then since then, you've worked really hard with us to, get to where we are. Everyone, I'm sure everyone agrees with me that it's been a very intellectually stimulating, successful debate. That's Laciac's maiden edition of the Laciac Live Debate, and we thank you very much. So I would say Eshe Pupo, which is thank you very much in my native Nigerian language. Also, I'd like to thank the LLD, the Laciac Live Debates Committee, Tunde Fagbohonu, Abayomi Okubote, Titi Lopez, Simi Adetona. Thank you so much. All your hard work has clearly paid off. Well done. Thank you. Thank you to the supporting institutions. Thank you for promoting the debate, the African Arbitration Academy, the African Arbitration Association. Thank you to DELAS Disputes Resolution, Resolve Online, Creed LawNet, the British Nigerian Law Forum, CIMAC, the Casablanca International Mediation and Arbitration Center. Yeah, that's it. Thank you to each and every one of you. Last of all, I'd like to thank you, distinguished guests. Thank you so much for your time. You have spent your morning with us, and we hope we have earned the privilege of your time. We're very grateful. I would leave you with an invitation, and Danga already mentioned this, the LLD series. It's an ongoing series. The next one will be in October, and it will be on a very topical issue, investor-state dispute settlement in Africa. Please look out for the invitations. So it's goodbye, and then it's see you later. So thank you so much. Thank you and goodbye. Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you very much.